Dr. Lila Hart thought she'd seen every kind of pain walk into her office. But the day Caleb Reed showed up, something felt different. He spoke calmly, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't look away from, something broken that matched her own. She told herself it was just empathy, part of her job. But when their session started stretching late into the night, Lila felt the line between help and hunger start to blur. She didn't know it yet, but this man would destroy everything she built, and she'd help him do it. Lila's office sat on the second floor of a quiet building near the edge of an old factory district. The air always smelled faintly of metal and rain. She liked the distance. It made her feel safe from the world she tried to fix every day. Her walls were painted a soft gray. Her desk perfectly organized. It was her one controlled space, even if she didn't feel in control anymore. When Caleb first sat across from her, she didn't realize how quickly that sense of order would vanish. His calm voice hid something sharp underneath. Caleb's story began like many others. A childhood marked by loss, a failed relationship, sleepless nights. But the more he spoke, the more Lila saw herself in him. His description of fear, the need to hide emotions, and the constant search for approval, it all mirrored her own past. She kept her notes short, though her mind kept racing. He wasn't like her usual patience. There was a steadiness in him, a quiet intensity that made her forget the clock ticking behind her. The session ran late, and when he left, she realized she hadn't even charged him. That night, Lila stayed at the office long after closing. She replayed the session in her head, trying to pinpoint why it unsettled her. She told herself it was professional curiosity, but it didn't feel that simple. His eyes had lingered on her bookshelf, his tone soft but deliberate. She wondered what kind of person could sound that broken yet so composed. It reminded her of the early years after her father's death, how she smiled through pain, pretending to have control. For the first time in years, Lila couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his face in her mind. The next morning, Lila arrived early and rearranged her desk. She blamed insomnia for her restlessness, but deep down she knew better. She read through Caleb's intake form again. His handwriting was neat, but his answers felt vague, like he was hiding something behind politeness. She made a note to ask about his past relationships in the next session. When she glanced at her calendar, she saw she had written his name twice. She told herself it was a scheduling mistake, but part of her didn't want to erase it. It felt good to see his name there. Lila's mentor, Dr. Wren, called to check in. He asked how she was handling her workload and reminded her about maintaining boundaries. She promised him she was fine, though she hadn't been for months. After hanging up, she stared at her reflection in the office window. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Tired eyes, messy hair, and that strange excitement she hadn't felt in years. She straightened her jacket as Caleb walked in. His quiet smile caught her off guard. She greeted him like any patient, but her voice cracked slightly. He noticed, and she felt exposed. Their sessions began to blur together over the next few weeks. Caleb spoke about his dreams, his fears, and the way people always left when he needed them most. Lila listened carefully, but something inside her shifted. The more he revealed, the more she opened up too, without meaning to. She found herself sharing opinions she normally kept hidden, almost like she wanted him to understand her. Every time he thanked her for listening, she felt something tighten in her chest. She brushed it off as empathy, but the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger. Lila started spending more time in her office, even when she didn't have appointments. She told herself she was catching up on paperwork, but most nights she just stared at Caleb's file. It was thin compared to others, barely a few pages. Still, she felt like it held weight, something heavy she couldn't put down. She found herself wondering what he was doing, if he was sleeping, if he thought about their sessions. She hated herself for caring so much. She reminded herself of her training. Patients were temporary, but she already knew this one wasn't. Rain poured outside during their 4th week of therapy. Caleb talked about his father's anger, and the sound of thunder made Lila flinch. she didn't tell him why. The storm brought back memories she had buried for years. Her father yelling, the slammed doors, the silence that followed. She felt a strange sense of connection, almost relief, that someone else understood that kind of fear. When the session ended, she realized she hadn't written a single note. She just listened, almost lost in his voice. When he thanked her again, it sounded like he was comforting her instead. Her birthday came and went without notice. A half-eaten cake sat forgotten on her kitchen counter. Candles melted into a gray mess. She hadn't told anyone it was her birthday, not even Caleb. She didn't want to celebrate. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine and stared at the flickering streetlight outside her window. The city felt quiet, empty. For a moment she thought about calling someone, her sister, a friend. But instead she opened her laptop and checked her schedule. She smiled faintly when she saw his name on tomorrow's list. That felt like enough. Caleb arrived the next day with a small gift. A jar of imported coffee beans from a shop downtown. Lila hesitated but accepted it. She told herself it was harmless. He said it reminded him of her office, calm and warm. She placed it on her desk, its dark label catching the light. When he left, she sat there for a long time, staring at it. It felt like a promise, though she couldn't say of what. That night she opened the jar just to smell it. The scent was rich, comforting, and somehow personal. She couldn't throw it away. Days turned into weeks. Lila's sessions with Caleb grew longer, sometimes spilling past closing hours. She began canceling other appointments to fit him in. Her receptionist noticed but said nothing. Lila told herself it was because Caleb needed her more than others. His stories became darker. His emotions rawer. She started to feel protective, almost possessive. It wasn't professional, but it felt human. When she finally closed her office one night, she caught her reflection in the glass door and saw something that scared her. A woman who didn't look like a therapist anymore, but something else entirely. Her mentor emailed asking for her weekly progress reports. Lila froze. She hadn't updated Caleb's file in weeks. She opened his folder and realized she didn't know what to write anymore. Their sessions no longer fit clinical terms. No clear objectives, no measurable improvement. Just two people circling the same wounds. She typed random words to fill the page, then deleted them. When she closed her laptop, she felt like she'd erased a part of herself too. She stared at the coffee jar again, then whispered a quiet thought she would never admit she didn't want him cured. Lila began dreaming about Caleb. In one dream, he sat in her office chair while she lay on the couch, confessing her fears. In another, they were standing in the rain, and he reached for her hand. When she woke up, her heart raced, like she had done something wrong. She tried journaling to release the tension, but every line circled back to him. At work, she avoided her coworkers. Every question felt like an intrusion. She told herself this connection was part of therapy, a necessary bond for healing. Deep down, she knew she was lying. Caleb started staying after sessions, lingering by the door as if waiting for her to stop him from leaving. Sometimes she did. They would talk about random things, music, food, even favorite places to travel. Lila knew this wasn't right, but it felt harmless compared to the thoughts she was already having. When he smiled, it was like sunlight breaking through a storm she didn't want to end. That night, she went home and sat in the dark, unable to shake the warmth his smile left behind. It wasn't therapy anymore. It was something dangerous, dressed as comfort. Her coworker Mia stopped by her office one morning and commented that Lila seemed happier lately. Lila smiled, pretending it was true. In reality, she felt both alive and exhausted. Her emotions were tangled. Her thoughts a constant battle between guilt and craving. She tried to distract herself by organizing her desk, but every item reminded her of him. The chair he sat in, the mug he used, the scent of coffee that never faded. She didn't know it yet, but the walls of her careful life were already cracking, and soon something would break completely. Caleb began sending short messages to confirm appointments, then casual notes about his day. Lila told herself it was good progress. He was opening up outside sessions. Still, she kept her phone nearby even during other appointments, waiting for his messages. Each notification made her pulse quicken. She deleted the texts after reading them, afraid someone might notice. At night, she caught herself rereading them in her mind. It wasn't what a therapist should feel, but she didn't stop. She liked the attention. She liked the feeling of being seen by someone who seemed to understand her. She started scheduling extra sessions, sneaking them in after hours. The receptionist didn't log them, and Lila didn't care. She felt like she and Caleb were building something real, something fragile and private. He talked about his past with growing trust, and she leaned closer each time, listening like it mattered more than anything else. She didn't realize how often she smiled now, or how her hands shook slightly when he sat down. Every night, she told herself she'd stop this soon. Every morning, she booked another appointment. Control was slipping, and she didn't even want it back. One afternoon, as Caleb spoke about his father's anger, the smell of rain filled the office. Lila froze. It was the same scent that haunted her childhood: wet asphalt, thunder close enough to shake the glass. Caleb kept talking, describing fear that sounded exactly like hers. For a second, it felt like they were the same person, trapped in the same story. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him she understood, but she stayed quiet. When he left, she sat there trembling, realizing she hadn't written a single note. The rain kept falling long after he was gone. Later that night, she noticed the forgotten birthday cake still sitting on her kitchen counter. It had gone stale, untouched. She stared at it for a long time, thinking about how she had no one to share it with. Caleb had mentioned once that he didn't celebrate his birthdays either. She almost texted him to tell him that, to joke about it, but stopped herself just in time. She knew she shouldn't mix her personal life with work, but lately, her whole life felt like work. And Caleb was the only part of it that didn't feel empty. The next morning, Lila walked into her office early, craving the calm of routine. The first thing she saw was the jar of imported coffee beans on her desk. She picked it up and smiled. The scent had faded slightly, but she still liked keeping it close. When Caleb arrived, he noticed it immediately, and smiled too. It felt like a secret between them, something no one else would understand. When he left that day, Lila realized she hadn't written down any of the session notes again. Instead, she wrote only one line: "He feels like home." She started researching trauma therapy methods at night, hoping to justify her growing closeness with Caleb. She convinced herself that unconventional methods worked best for people like him. The line between what was helpful and what was personal grew thinner every day. Her mentor's warning echoed faintly in her mind, but she silenced it with work. She opened old books she hadn't touched in years, underlining words about empathy and trust. When she looked up, she realized it was past midnight. The jar of coffee sat open beside her, the scent wrapping around her like comfort and danger. During their next session, Caleb shared a story about a dream he kept having. A house filled with doors that wouldn't open. Lila listened carefully, wondering what it meant. When he described the feeling of being trapped, her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him she felt that way too, but she swallowed the words. Instead, she asked questions, though her voice was softer now. When the session ended, Caleb smiled and said he felt lighter. Lila locked the door behind him, leaning against it. She didn't feel lighter. She felt the opposite, weighted down by something she couldn't name. Her coworkers began to notice small changes. She wore brighter clothes, did her hair differently, and stayed late almost every night. When asked why, she said she was helping a patient through a tough recovery. She didn't mention how her heart sped up before each session, or how she memorized the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Her world was slowly shrinking around him. She started skipping lunches and stopped visiting her sister on weekends. The outside world faded while the sessions with Caleb became the only part of her life that still felt alive and meaningful. One evening, Lila tried to search Caleb's name online. She expected to find social media profiles or old news articles, but nothing came up. Not even a trace. It was strange, but she brushed it off. Maybe he kept a low profile. Still, curiosity grew inside her like a small fire. She tried again the next day with different spellings, but found nothing. For the first time, doubt crept in. She told herself it didn't matter who he was before therapy. Yet deep down she wanted to know everything about him. The not knowing made her restless and uneasy. That week, a sudden power outage hit during their session. The room went completely dark. Caleb didn't move, and neither did Lila. For a few seconds, all she could hear was his slow breathing. The silence between them was thick, almost intimate. When the lights flickered back on, he was still watching her. She looked away quickly, pretending to check the clock. The air felt different after that, heavier, charged with something unspoken. Lila ended the session early, claiming she felt unwell. But as she drove home, her pulse refused to slow down. Something had changed forever. That night she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her flinch. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock. She replayed the blackout in her mind again and again, imagining his eyes on her in the dark. It didn't feel frightening, just impossible to forget. She knew it was wrong to feel this way, but she didn't care anymore. She wanted to understand what he wanted from her, why he felt so familiar. By morning she looked exhausted. When she finally stood in front of her mirror, she realized she hadn't looked like a therapist in weeks. Lila decided to distance herself, at least for a few days. She told her receptionist to reschedule Caleb's next appointment. But by the second day, she already missed him. She checked her phone constantly, hoping he'd reach out. When he didn't, she grew restless. She cleaned her apartment twice, then opened her laptop just to look at his name in her notes. It was pathetic, she thought. How much power a stranger had over her. Yet the thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache. She told herself the break was temporary, even if she didn't believe it. When Caleb finally returned, it was as if no time had passed. He smiled, calm as always, while Lisa struggled to hide her relief. They sat in silence for a while before he spoke about his dreams again, about wanting to feel safe. His voice was steady, but she noticed his hands trembling. She wanted to reach out, but didn't. When he left, she stood at the door long after he was gone, staring at the empty chair where he'd sat. That chair had become the center of her world, and she didn't know how to escape it. Lila started wearing lipstick again. Something she hadn't done in years. She told herself it made her look more professional. But deep down she knew it wasn't for that. When Caleb arrived for his session, he noticed, and she felt a spark of pride mixed with shame. Their conversations drifted further from therapy, turning into stories about books, music, and loneliness. She told herself it was all part of building trust, yet her stomach flipped every time he smiled. The line between treatment and temptation was fading fast, and Lila stopped pretending she wanted to keep it clear. Caleb began to mirror her habits, drinking the same brand of coffee, using similar phrases. Lila noticed but didn't mind. It made her feel connected, almost like they were sharing something invisible. She shared small details about her own life in return. How she hated birthdays, how silence made her anxious, how she envied people who could forget the past. He listened with the kind of attention she hadn't felt in years. She knew it was wrong to blur those boundaries, but she felt alive again. That sense of danger was addictive, and she didn't want it to stop. Their sessions turned into long conversations that drifted off topic. Lila began to forget she was supposed to guide him. Instead, it felt like they were equals. Two people trying to make sense of pain together. She thought that maybe this was what real healing looked like. Messy, human, and unpredictable. She ignored her mentor's rules and trusted her instincts instead. Every time Caleb left, she felt both calm and restless. It was like he took a part of her with him each time he walked out the door. and she didn't know how to get it back. Lila's mentor emailed again, reminding her to send progress reports. She sighed and promised herself she'd do it later. The truth was, she no longer knew what to write. Their sessions had stopped being about progress long ago. They were about comfort now, for both of them. She started to believe that maybe they were helping each other heal. But a small part of her knew that wasn't true. She was falling deeper into something dangerous, and Caleb was pulling her along with him, slowly, gently, as if he knew exactly how far she would let him go. Caleb started talking about someone from his past, a woman who betrayed him. He said she lied, manipulated him, and left him when he needed her most. Lila felt anger on his behalf. She told herself it was empathy, but it felt more personal. She wondered what kind of woman could hurt him like that. Later that night she lay awake thinking about the story. The woman in his life became a faceless rival in her imagination, someone she wanted to outshine, to replace. She didn't realize how much of her sanity she was quietly giving away. Lila began keeping her phone near her bed in case Caleb called or texted. She told herself it was for emergencies, but she knew that wasn't true. The small glow of her screen became her new comfort at night. Every buzz made her heart race, even when it wasn't him. She stopped reading books, stopped cooking. Her world shrank to the size of a notification. Once, when he didn't message for 2 days, she felt physically sick. Her mind spun with worry, anger, and longing. It wasn't love, at least, not the kind that healed. It was something darker. The receptionist noticed Lila's growing distraction. She started whispering to coworkers, wondering what was going on with the usually strict and distant doctor. Lila heard the whispers but didn't care. She had learned to tune out everything that wasn't him. The clinic felt like a shell. The other patients like background noise. Every question, every story she heard, reminded her of Caleb in some way. When he arrived for his session, her mood shifted instantly. His presence filled the room like oxygen. Everyone else became irrelevant. In her mind, the rest of the world quietly disappeared. One afternoon, Caleb left a handwritten note on her desk before leaving. It said, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." His handwriting was neat, deliberate, and almost tender. Lila read it twice, then 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her drawer. She told herself she'd throw it away later, but she didn't. Instead, she found herself reading it late at night, when she couldn't sleep. It felt like proof that she mattered to someone. She didn't realize how much power that small piece of paper had already gained over her. Lila's mentor called to schedule a check-in meeting, asking for Caleb's progress details. She froze at her desk, staring at the phone as it rang. She couldn't bring herself to answer. She knew if anyone looked too closely, they'd see how far she drifted from protocol. She turned off her phone and sat in silence. The clinic lights flickered slightly, and for a moment she imagined Caleb sitting across from her again. The thought calmed her. That's when she realized how dependent she had become. He wasn't her patient anymore. He was her only anchor in the chaos. Caleb began showing up near the clinic on days he didn't have appointments. Sometimes he said he was just passing by. Other times he waited quietly in the parking lot. Lila knew she should tell him to stop. But she didn't. She liked knowing he was there. It made her feel chosen, important. The receptionist found it strange, but Lila brushed it off with a smile. Each time she saw him outside, her pulse quickened. It didn't feel like a boundary being crossed. It felt like connection. And for Lila, connection was something she hadn't felt in years. Her other patients started canceling appointments. They said she seemed distracted, distant, not fully there. Lila didn't argue. She knew it was true, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Caleb was all that mattered. His pain, his progress, his attention, they had become the only things that made her feel useful. The world outside her office felt gray and meaningless. Even when she walked through the city, everything reminded her of him. The air, The rain, the quiet streets, it was as if her entire life had reshaped itself to revolve around a man she barely knew. One night, Caleb didn't show up for his appointment. Lila waited for an hour, then another. She checked her phone repeatedly, but there were no messages. By the time she turned off the lights, her stomach felt heavy with panic. She drove home, every passing car making her heart skip, hoping one of them would be his. When she reached her apartment, she sat in the dark, waiting for her phone to buzz. It never did. She realized, for the first time, that she wasn't worried as a therapist. She was worried as someone who had already fallen. Lila didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made her jump, convinced it might be Caleb. She checked her phone so many times the screen burned her eyes. By morning, exhaustion turned to anger. She told herself he was being manipulative, testing her. But deep down, she felt abandoned. She paced her living room, debating whether to call him. The professional part of her whispered to stop. But the desperate part won. She typed a message asking if he was okay, then deleted it before sending. She hated how much her happiness now depended on one missing man. The next morning, Caleb showed up as if nothing happened. He apologized casually, saying he had been tired. Lila felt both relief and rage, but she kept her tone calm. She wanted to know why he didn't call. Why he didn't care. She was worried. When he thanked her for understanding, her anger faded instantly. That quick shift scared her. He had power over her moods, her thoughts, her balance. By the time he left, she wasn't angry anymore. She was grateful. She sat at her desk afterward, feeling both comforted and trapped, unsure which feeling was stronger. The following week, Lila realized how little of her normal life remained. Her kitchen sink overflowed with dishes. Her laundry sat untouched. The plants in her apartment were dying. Yet she didn't care. The only thing she looked forward to were the sessions. They made her feel needed, alive, and irreplaceable. When her mentor asked about her declining attendance at staff meetings, she lied easily, saying she was overloaded with patients. She wasn't overloaded. She was obsessed. Caleb was her favorite subject, her worst mistake, and the one thing keeping her from collapsing under the weight of loneliness. As their sessions continued, Caleb began describing a woman he once loved, a therapist who had betrayed him. Lila's stomach turned as he spoke, his words sharp and bitter. She felt defensive, even though she wasn't the woman he was describing. Or maybe she was in some way. The story blurred lines in her mind until she started seeing herself in his past. By the end of the session, she was shaking. She told herself it was empathy again. But it wasn't. It was fear. She didn't want to become another woman he spoke about with hate in his eyes. Days passed, and Caleb missed another session. This time, Lila didn't panic. She drove to his listed address instead. The building was old, with peeling paint and empty mailboxes. She climbed the stairs, each creak echoing through the hall. When she knocked, no one answered. She waited, staring at the cracked door, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. A neighbor peeked out and said there was no one named Caleb living there. Lila forced a smile and left quickly. In the car, her hands trembled. For the first time, she wondered if he had ever existed at all. Back at home, Lila tried to calm down. She opened her files, searching for proof that Caleb was real, appointment logs, payment receipts, anything. But most of it was handwritten, not digital. It looked messy, inconsistent. Her signature was on everything, but something about the details didn't feel right. She checked her phone for his messages, but many were gone. She didn't remember deleting them. She sat there in silence, her heart racing. She whispered his name, half expecting an answer. The room stayed quiet. For the first time, the silence felt heavy enough to crush her. At work the next morning, Lila felt like she was walking through fog. Every sound felt distant, every face unfamiliar. She forced herself through her schedule, barely paying attention. When Caleb finally appeared in the doorway, she almost cried with relief. He smiled like always, calm and polite. She didn't ask about the address or the messages. She was too afraid he'd vanish again. They talked about small things, meaningless things, but it didn't matter. He was there, and that was enough. That night she left her office lights on, just in case he decided to come back. Lila's mentor called again, this time sounding concerned. He said he noticed inconsistencies in her reports and missing patient data. She promised to fix it. But her voice trembled. After hanging up, she opened Caleb's file and realized half of it was gone. She must have deleted or misplaced it, but she couldn't remember when. She tried to rewrite the missing notes from memory, yet every sentence felt like fiction. Her handwriting shook. It was as if she was fabricating a person who had never existed, but she couldn't stop. She needed him to be real. She needed proof. That night, she poured herself coffee from the jar Caleb gave her. The smell filled the apartment, rich and bitter. It brought him back for a moment, like he was sitting beside her. She stared at the empty cup afterward, feeling foolish. She opened her laptop to reread old therapy articles, hoping for distraction. Instead, she found herself searching for signs of delusion, mental fatigue, burnout. Anything that could explain what was happening to her. She closed the screen when her reflection appeared, pale and hollow-eyed. She didn't want to see herself anymore. She only wanted to see him. Quiet filled her apartment, the kind that buzzed faintly in the ears. Lila boiled water for tea and sat by the window watching the rain start to fall. She told herself she needed to breathe, to think. But her thoughts only circled back to Caleb. The smell of rain reminded her of that blackout night in the office, the warmth of his presence in the dark. She realized she didn't just miss him. She was addicted to the way he made her feel safe in her own chaos. She sipped her tea slowly, pretending she wasn't already lost. The next day, Caleb came in wearing the same jacket as always, rain dripping from the sleeves. He spoke softly, almost too softly, asking if she'd ever been scared of herself. The question hit her harder than expected. She nodded without realizing it, her throat dry. The session ended early that day. After he left, she couldn't remember what they had actually talked about. She checked her notes, but the page was blank, except for his name. She stared at it for minutes, the letters blurring, feeling like she had written her own confession without meaning to. Later, she received an email from her mentor announcing a random audit of all patient records. Lila froze. Her heart raced as she imagined what they would find. Missing notes, unlogged sessions, gifts from patients. It was enough to ruin her career. She stayed late that night, trying to fix everything. She rewrote Caleb's records from scratch, adding just enough detail to look real. But as she typed, the memories started to shift. Some details didn't match anymore. She couldn't tell what was real and what she had imagined. By midnight she was sweating, still typing in circles. While sorting through old folders, Lila found something odd tucked inside Caleb's file. A folded bus ticket dated 1999. She frowned. The ticket was yellowed and brittle, from a city she'd never visited. She had no idea why it was there. When she flipped it over, someone had written a name on the back. It wasn't Caleb's. It was her father's. The handwriting looked like hers. A chill spread through her chest. She set it down quickly, staring at it from a distance. Something about it felt wrong, like she had uncovered a memory she was never supposed to find. The next morning she asked Caleb casually about 1999. He smiled in a way that made her uneasy and said he didn't like to think about that year. His tone was calm, but his eyes flickered with something dark. Lila didn't push further. When the session ended, he thanked her for her curiosity, and she couldn't tell if it was genuine or mocking. After he left, she checked her father's old things, hoping to find some explanation for the ticket. There was nothing. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb knew something about her life he shouldn't. The following night, she started hearing strange noises in her apartment, soft clicks, faint static. Her voicemail filled with messages that contained nothing but silence and a low hum. She assumed it was a technical glitch, but part of her feared it wasn't. Once she thought she heard her own voice whispering her name on one of the recordings. She deleted it quickly, telling herself she was imagining things. But after that she couldn't sleep without leaving the lights on. She began to dread both night and morning because neither offered peace anymore. She was unraveling, slowly but visibly. At work, she noticed Caleb mentioning things she had never told him, details about her apartment, the color of her bedroom walls, even her favorite mug. She smiled at first, thinking maybe she had slipped up during a session. But when he described the layout of her kitchen, she froze. He said it casually, like he had seen it himself. She forced a laugh, but her hands trembled beneath the desk. She reminded herself he was just observant, maybe even lucky. Still, when she went home that night, she double-checked her locks twice before trying to sleep. Her dreams became more vivid. She saw Caleb standing in her living room watching her sleep. His eyes were calm, almost kind, but his presence felt suffocating. When she woke up, her pulse was racing, and she swore she could still smell his cologne in the air. She tried to convince herself it was just stress. She'd seen patients describe this attachment confusion, emotional transference. But deep down she knew this wasn't a theory. It was something she could feel, something that didn't stop when she opened her eyes. She was living in the nightmare she used to treat. Caleb missed another appointment. Lila's fear turned into obsession. She couldn't stand not knowing where he was, what he was doing, or if he'd ever come back. She drove past his address again, even though she knew it was pointless. The windows were still dark, the door unchanged. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, whispering to herself that she wasn't crazy. The world outside looked dull and far away. She checked her phone one last time before driving home, but her heart didn't slow down. She knew she wouldn't rest until she saw him again. Her coworkers began to talk more openly about her strange behavior. One said she looked pale and exhausted. Another claimed she'd been talking to herself in the hallway. Lila pretended not to hear. The whispers felt distant, irrelevant. Her mind was too full of Caleb's voice, his smile, his stories. She played back their last session in her head like a song stuck on repeat. Every word seemed heavier now, carrying meaning she hadn't noticed before. She felt like she was being drawn somewhere she couldn't resist, even if it led her straight into ruin. That evening, as she sat in her car outside his empty building again, something shifted. The sky was gray, and a light drizzle blurred her view. She realized she was no longer trying to find him. She was waiting for him to find her. The thought scared her, but it also brought strange comfort. She wanted to believe he would show up, explain everything, make it make sense. Instead, she just sat there until her coffee turned cold. When she finally started the engine, she glanced at the passenger seat and imagined him sitting there beside her, smiling. Quiet beat 2 came naturally that night. Lila went home, changed into an old sweater, and curled up on her couch. She watched the rain slide down the window, blurring the city lights outside. It reminded her of the way Caleb's stories used to blend truth and lies until they became the same. She wondered when she had started doing that too. Her phone sat silent beside her. She didn't touch it. She just stared at the empty room and thought about the bus ticket, the missing files, the words she couldn't trust anymore. She felt completely hollow. By morning, she had convinced herself to act normal. She forced a smile at work and answered questions politely. But underneath, her nerves were on fire. She felt watched even in daylight, as if someone was just out of sight, studying her. Every time her office phone rang, she jumped. When the receptionist handed her a note saying Caleb had called to reschedule, Lila felt dizzy with relief. She didn't even question how he had managed to call after disappearing for days. All she cared about was that he wanted to see her again. Nothing else mattered anymore. Lila spent the next few hours preparing for his session. She cleaned the office, rearranged her books, and even wore a new blouse. Her pulse was steady but fast, like she was getting ready for a date instead of therapy. When he finally walked in, she felt a mix of calm and chaos. He smiled, as if he knew exactly how much she had missed him. They spoke quietly, almost intimately, about ordinary things. It didn't feel like therapy anymore. It felt like confession. By the time he left, her hands were shaking. She didn't know why she was crying. That night, she stared at her ceiling for hours. The clock ticked softly, but her thoughts were loud. She couldn't stop wondering what Caleb was doing, where he went when he wasn't with her. The thought of him seeing someone else, another therapist, another woman, made her stomach twist. She laughed bitterly at herself, realizing she sounded like one of her own patients. Still, she couldn't stop. The line between doctor and dependent had vanished. She wasn't helping him heal anymore. She was clinging to him, hoping he wouldn't notice how broken she had become herself. The next morning, Lila walked into her office early. The building was quiet, sunlight spilling through the blinds. She stood by her desk, staring at the chair where Caleb always sat. It looked too empty, too normal. She placed her hand on the backrest and closed her eyes, imagining his voice. For a moment she thought she heard it, a soft whisper saying her name. She opened her eyes, heart racing, but the room was still. She laughed nervously, blaming fatigue, but somewhere deep inside, she knew she wasn't imagining it. Something unseen had already taken hold of her life. Lila's mentor called her into a meeting. The tone was formal, almost cold. He told her there were missing files, inconsistencies, and unanswered complaints from patients she'd ignored. Lila nodded, pretending to listen, but her mind drifted elsewhere. Every mention of her negligence sounded distant, meaningless compared to the thought of Caleb. She promised to fix everything, though she didn't know how. When the meeting ended, her mentor gave her a long, disappointed look. She walked out numb. Outside the office, she texted Caleb to confirm their next session, her hands shaking with both fear and need. Caleb didn't respond. Hours passed, then a full day. Lila's nerves unraveled again. She scrolled through old messages, searching for patterns, for clues in his wording. Every silence from him felt like punishment. She went to his supposed apartment a third time, but it was still empty. This time she pressed her ear against the door, hoping to hear movement. There was only stillness. She almost knocked anyway, desperate for any sound. When she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in a broken mirror in the hallway. For a moment she didn't recognize the face staring back. The next morning she arrived at work to find the clinic strangely quiet. Her receptionist avoided eye contact, whispering with others. Lila didn't ask why. She walked straight to her office, locked the door, and opened Caleb's file again. She flipped through every page, searching for something, anything that proved he was real. Then she saw her own handwriting scrawled in the margins. Notes she didn't remember writing. Some sentences described her own emotions, not his. One line stood out. "He is inside me now." She froze, staring at it, trying to remember when she wrote it. Nothing came back. Lila printed out every page of Caleb's file, spreading them across the floor. The papers surrounded her like a circle she couldn't step out of. She noticed dates overlapping, inconsistencies that made no sense. Some sessions were listed twice, on different days with different outcomes. Her memory began to slip between the lines. She couldn't tell which events had actually happened. It was as if she had been living two separate timelines without knowing. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. When she looked, it was an unknown number. The message was simple: "Stop looking." She dropped the phone. That night she dreamed of the bus ticket again. In the dream she was on the bus alone, clutching the ticket in her hand. Caleb sat behind her, whispering her father's name. When she woke up, her heart was pounding, and her palms were damp with sweat. She tried to tell herself it was stress, but the fear didn't fade. The dream felt more like a memory. She checked the time. It was 3:03 a.m. A soft tapping sound came from her front door. She froze. When she finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. She returned to work the next morning, pale and exhausted. She told herself to focus, to pretend everything was normal. Caleb arrived right on time, calm as ever. The moment she saw him, her panic melted away. They spoke as if nothing had happened, their voices quiet, almost intimate. But something about him was different. His tone colder, his eyes sharper. He mentioned her father briefly, asking how he died. Lila froze, unsure if she had ever told him that. She brushed it off, smiling tightly. After he left, she sat at her desk trembling, unable to breathe properly. The following week, Caleb's behavior shifted again. He began arriving early, waiting outside her office door before hours. He said it was to feel safe. She believed him, though every instinct screamed otherwise. One afternoon, he complimented her perfume, the same one she only wore at home. The comment left her uneasy. She started locking her apartment door twice at night, sometimes pushing a chair against it. But even then, she couldn't shake the feeling he was near. His presence had become part of her. She didn't know if she feared him or needed him more. Maybe both. Her mentor stopped by unannounced one afternoon. He wanted to talk privately. He asked about Caleb's case, about boundaries, about the missing session notes. Lila smiled too much, spoke too fast, tried too hard to sound confident. The mentor watched her quietly, his concern turning into suspicion. He said she seemed unwell. She brushed it off, claiming exhaustion. As soon as he left, she felt relief so deep it almost hurt. She sat in silence afterward, staring at her reflection in the dark window. For a split second, she thought she saw someone standing behind her, smiling. That night, the voicemail light on her phone blinked again. When she pressed play, she heard her own voice asking if she was ready for another session. She dropped the phone, heart racing. She played it again, listening carefully. It wasn't an old recording. It was recent. She checked the call log, no number displayed. Panic settled in her stomach. She unplugged the phone, but even after that, she swore she could still hear faint breathing on the other end. She left the apartment immediately, driving through empty streets, telling herself she just needed air. But she knew better. The sound of a distant bell echoed through the empty streets as she drove. It was faint, rhythmic, almost like it was calling her. She turned off the radio, but the sound didn't stop. Every few seconds it returned, soft and low. It reminded her of the clock in her father's old study, a sound she hadn't heard since childhood. She started crying without knowing why. The bell grew louder as she neared her office. When she parked, the noise stopped. Silence filled the air. She stepped out, trembling, unsure if she had followed something, or if something had followed her. Lila entered the building slowly, the hallway lights flickering above her. Her office door was slightly open, though she was certain she had locked it earlier. She pushed it gently, heart pounding. Inside, everything looked untouched except for one thing: the jar of coffee beans. It had been moved to the center of her desk. The lid was off. When she leaned closer, she realized it wasn't filled with beans anymore. It was ashes. Dark, fine ashes. She stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. There was a faint smell of smoke in the air, and something else familiar. She sat down, staring at the jar for what felt like hours. Her thoughts tangled into each other. The ashes could be anything, she told herself. Maybe a prank, maybe nothing. But deep down, she knew it wasn't random. She remembered her father's journals burned years ago after his death. She had watched them turn to dust in their fireplace. The smell in the room was the same. Tears welled up in her eyes. Caleb had known details he shouldn't have. Now her father's ashes, or something pretending to be them, sat in front of her, waiting for acknowledgement. Her mentor visited the clinic that afternoon, concerned about her mental state. He asked to see Caleb's file. Lila refused at first, then reluctantly handed it over. As he flipped through the pages, his face darkened. He said there was no patient named Caleb Reed in the official system. No billing, no intake form, no record at all. Lila's voice cracked as she argued, insisting there had to be. The mentor placed the folder down and told her to take time off. She sat frozen long after he left, staring at the empty doorway, unable to feel anything. That evening, Lila tore apart her office searching for proof. She checked old emails, payment records, and phone logs, but everything led nowhere. Her mind screamed for logic, but none came. She began connecting the dots differently now. Her father's death, the bus ticket, the ashes, the way Caleb knew things he shouldn't. Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was something else. She whispered his name in the dark room, half expecting an answer. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. In the reflection of the window, she swore she saw him standing behind her again. Quiet beat 3 came in the form of stillness. Lila sat at her desk in total darkness, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. She thought about how far she'd fallen from helping people find peace to drowning in her own delusion. She opened her hands and looked at the faint ink stains on her palms, the marks from writing his name too often. She smiled sadly. She realized she didn't want to be cured. She just wanted to feel something that made sense again, even if it destroyed her. The silence around her felt like surrender. When the lights came back on, a single note lay on her desk. It hadn't been there before. Her name was written on it in Caleb's handwriting. Her pulse spiked as she unfolded it. Inside were 3 words: "Session not over." She dropped the paper, breathing fast. She looked around the office, but everything was still. She picked the note up again, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. She didn't know if it was real, or if her mind had finally started creating him completely. Either way, she felt his presence as clearly as if he were right there. She left work early, unable to think straight. The city lights blurred through her windshield as she drove aimlessly. Every time she stopped at a red light, she half expected to see Caleb crossing the street. When she finally pulled over, her hands were shaking. She whispered his name again, like a habit she couldn't quit. The air inside the car felt heavy, like someone else was breathing beside her. She turned quickly, but the seat was empty. Still, she couldn't bring herself to drive home. The world outside her window felt strange, warped and watching. Back at her apartment, Lila found a package waiting at her door. There was no return address. Inside was another jar identical to the first. This one filled with dark soil and a single red thread coiled neatly on top. Her breath caught. She lifted the thread carefully, noticing it was tied in a small knot, almost like a bracelet. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She placed it on her counter and sat on the floor beside it, staring for hours. Every time she blinked, she swore it moved slightly. Sleep refused to come. She started digging through old family boxes, searching for anything that could explain Caleb's connection to her father. She found photographs, letters, and medical records, but nothing about a man with that name. Then, tucked between 2 books, she found one of her father's journals. It was half burned, the edges charred. Inside, one phrase appeared over and over: "He is learning to speak through me." Her stomach dropped. She shut the book and backed away. The handwriting wasn't her father's anymore. It looked exactly like her own. The world tilted, and she couldn't breathe. The next morning, she skipped work entirely. She couldn't face the clinic, her mentor, or anyone else. She sat at home rereading the journal, trying to understand. Caleb's words, her father's handwriting, her own notes, they all blurred together. Maybe they were all the same voice now. She tried to call her mentor but hung up before he answered. She didn't want help. She just wanted to know who Caleb really was and why she felt like he'd always been part of her. The longer she thought about it, the less she believed he was ever human at all. A storm rolled in that evening, thunder shaking the windows. Lila sat in the dark, watching lightning flash across the sky. Every flash seemed to illuminate a shadow in the corner of her room. But when she turned her head, it vanished. She thought about calling the police. But what would she say? That her patient might be a ghost? That she might be haunting herself? The idea almost made her laugh. The storm raged outside, and for the first time she felt calm. She understood now that whatever Caleb was, he wasn't leaving until she finished the story. At midnight, her phone rang again. The same static-filled line crackled. This time she didn't hang up. She whispered his name softly into the receiver. The static faded, replaced by breathing. Then she heard her own voice say, "I'm here." The call ended. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stared at the screen. She didn't know if she had imagined it, or if she was speaking to herself from somewhere deeper. Either way, she knew the next session was coming. She couldn't stop it. Whatever they had started, it wasn't finished. Not yet. She went to the clinic early the next day, long before sunrise. The halls were silent, the air cold. She unlocked her office and turned on the small desk lamp. The coffee jar sat in its place again, this time sealed. Her notebook lay open beside it with a single phrase written across the page. Last session tonight. She didn't remember writing it. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't erase it. Instead, she whispered, "Okay." For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She felt strangely at peace. Maybe endings were just another kind of therapy. Maybe this was hers. As the day went on, Lila worked in silence. No patients came. No one called. The entire building felt abandoned, though she didn't remember telling anyone to stay home. By evening, the sun disappeared behind thick clouds. She lit a candle on her desk and sat in the chair opposite the one Caleb always used. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. The clock ticked slowly toward 7. She felt the air change before she heard anything. A quiet breath, a shift in the shadows. Then she smiled, whispering softly, "You came back." The candle flickered once, then steadied. Lila could feel someone there, though she saw no one. The air grew colder but not unpleasant. She spoke aloud, her voice trembling but calm. She told the empty room she was ready to end it, or to understand it. The smell of coffee filled the air again, rich and familiar. A faint sound followed, a chair creaking as if someone had just sat down across from her. She didn't look up right away. She didn't need to. She already knew exactly who it was. The chair across from Lila stayed still, but she could feel the air shift like someone had leaned forward to listen. Her throat tightened, but she began speaking anyway. She talked about guilt, loneliness, and how helping others had become her way to avoid saving herself. Her words spilled faster until they stopped making sense. She laughed weakly, wiping tears she hadn't realized were falling. The silence that followed felt alive, listening. Somewhere deep inside she felt a strange relief, like she was confessing not to a patient but to herself. At last, the light flickered. Lila took it as a sign to continue. She opened her notebook and started reading her old notes aloud. Her handwriting blurred between her eyes, the words shifting and crossing over. She read Caleb's name, then hers, over and over until they started to sound the same. Her voice cracked, and she stopped. The chair across from her groaned quietly like someone adjusting their position. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She whispered, "It's always been you," and felt the temperature drop slightly as if the room itself had been waiting for her to say it. The candle flame grew taller, brighter. Lila took a deep breath, her body trembling from exhaustion. She picked up the jar of ashes and set it between them. "You took everything," she said softly, though there was no one visible to hear. She stared at the jar like it was alive. Her mind filled with flashes. Her father's voice, Caleb's eyes, her own handwriting on pages she couldn't remember writing. It all blended into one continuous memory, looping endlessly. She whispered that she wanted it to stop. For the first time she felt like something in the room agreed. Her phone buzzed suddenly, vibrating against the desk. The screen showed an incoming call from her own number. Her hands shook as she answered. There was no sound, only breathing. Then a voice that sounded exactly like hers whispered, "Don't hang up." Lila froze. Her own voice began describing things she hadn't done yet. Picking up the notebook, lighting another candle, pouring the ashes. As she listened, her body began following the words, like a puppet on strings. When the call ended, she was holding the jar again, the lid open, her hands covered in fine black dust. Lila stood slowly, her legs weak. The smell of smoke filled the air again. She realized the candle flame had grown dangerously high, reaching toward the ceiling. She blew it out quickly, plunging the room into dim light. The silence afterward pressed against her chest. She could hear faint whispers now, not from one voice but many, soft, overlapping, like echoes from old sessions. Her patience, their words filled the space, merging with Caleb's voice, her father's voice, and her own. It was all one endless conversation. She dropped to her knees, clutching her ears, begging them to stop. When she opened her eyes, everything was quiet again. The candle was gone, replaced by the soft glow of morning light filtering through the blinds. For a brief moment, she thought she had fallen asleep at her desk, but the jar was gone too. In its place lay the old bus ticket from 1999, the same one she had found before. It was now damp and smudged, as if freshly handled. Her name was written on the back. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The ink felt wet. Beneath it, faintly, she could see another name, Caleb's. Lila ran her fingers over the names, the paper tearing slightly beneath her touch. It dawned on her that maybe there had never been two people at all. Maybe Caleb had been part of her, an echo of the pain she tried to heal in others. She thought about every time she had seen him outside, every message, every voice. What if she had been chasing herself this entire time? The idea didn't feel insane. It felt logical. It explained everything. Still, she whispered his name once more, just to make sure silence really was all that remained. The sound that answered wasn't silence. It was breathing. Slow, deep, steady breathing, coming from right in front of her. Lila's skin crawled as she looked up. The chair across from her moved slightly, creaking on its hinges. The air shimmered faintly, forming a faint outline, human-shaped still. Her pulse raced, but she didn't scream. She smiled instead, a tired, broken smile. Maybe this was her punishment. Or maybe it was her reunion. She whispered, "You never left." And the shape leaned forward closer. For the first time she wasn't sure who was haunting who anymore. Later that day, her mentor stopped by her office. He knocked twice, then entered when there was no answer. The air inside was stale, faintly smoky. Lila's chair sat empty, her notebook open on the desk. The first page read, "Final session." The next few pages were filled with strange scribbles, half-words, names and questions that made no sense. Her mentor frowned, confused. He called out for her softly, expecting her to appear from the back room, but the clinic was silent. He checked the window, locked. The light flickered once, then steadied, and he suddenly felt cold. He tried calling her phone, but it rang faintly somewhere in the room. He followed the sound to the filing cabinet. Inside, he found her phone on top of a stack of old files. The screen showed one voicemail, time-stamped only minutes earlier. Out of curiosity, he pressed play. At first, there was static. Then came Lila's voice, calm but hollow. "Thank you for coming. The session is over." The message ended abruptly. His stomach twisted. He turned toward the desk again, suddenly noticing something he hadn't before. 2 coffee cups sitting side by side, both half full. The mentor slowly backed away from the desk. His eyes fell on the coffee cups again. One was Lila's usual mug, the other a plain white cup the clinic didn't own. The faint smell of burnt coffee filled the room. He hesitated, then picked up her notebook. The handwriting inside shifted mid-sentence, starting neat, ending with jagged strokes. It alternated between her name and Caleb's, until the words blurred into one. The last line read, "He knows how to stay." The mentor felt a chill crawl up his neck. He put the notebook down carefully and left without looking back. That night, Lila sat alone in the dark somewhere far from the clinic. Her clothes were damp, her hair tangled. She wasn't sure how she got there. The faint hum of streetlights buzzed overhead. She felt lighter somehow, as if the version of her that used to panic no longer existed. In her lap sat the jar again, its lid sealed. The ashes inside shimmered faintly when she tilted it. She whispered something to it, something only she could hear. For the first time her voice sounded calm. She wasn't running anymore. She was waiting for the end. The following morning, a cleaner at the clinic found a strange recording device on Lila's desk. He pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft and detached, describing a patient named Caleb Reed, who mirrored her own trauma. As the recording continued, her tone changed, shifting between therapist and patient. Sometimes she spoke to herself. Sometimes she answered in another voice entirely. By the end, she said only one sentence: "The only way to end the therapy is to let him live through me." Then silence. The cleaner stopped the recording, unnerved, and quietly set it back down. Somewhere across town, Lila opened her eyes to a new morning. The world looked the same, but it didn't feel that way. She poured herself coffee and smiled faintly at the reflection in the mirror. For a moment she didn't recognize the face looking back. It was hers, but not quite. The eyes seemed sharper, the posture calmer, the smile unfamiliar. She set the mug down and whispered her name. Then she whispered his. Both sounded right. She didn't feel haunted anymore. She felt whole. Maybe that was what she wanted all along, to finally stop being two people. She sat by the window, writing in her journal. Each line came easily now. No more confusion. No more missing time. She wrote about closure, acceptance, and how sometimes healing meant destroying the version of yourself that couldn't move forward. She smiled as she finished the last sentence. "I'm free." Then she closed the notebook gently. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a bell. Steady, rhythmic, distant. She looked up at the sound, unbothered. She whispered, "It's time." In that moment she didn't feel like a therapist or a patient. She felt like both. If you're still wondering what really happened to Lila and Caleb, stay with me till the final part, because what comes next will change everything. That evening she walked back to the clinic. The streets were quiet, the sky pale and heavy with clouds. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The building smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. Everything looked untouched, frozen in time. She went straight to her office, lighting a candle on the desk. She sat in her chair, facing the empty one across from her. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. "Last session," she whispered. She wasn't talking to anyone else now. She was talking to herself. This was her final act of therapy, one way or another. She opened her old notebook and read through her notes one last time. Every page told a different version of the same story. Hers and his. The more she read, the less it mattered who had written them. All that remained was the truth that she and Caleb were mirrors of each other, reflections of pain too deep to separate. She placed the notebook down carefully, then took out a small lighter. Her breath was steady. She had burned her father's words once before. Maybe it was time to burn her own. Fire had always been the cleanest kind of ending. The candle's flame danced wildly as she flicked the lighter. A small corner of the notebook caught fire. The pages curled, blackening quickly. The smoke smelled sharp and earthy, filling the room with a strange warmth. She watched quietly, no fear, no regret. As the last page turned to ash, she heard the familiar sound of a chair creaking across from her. She didn't look up. She smiled softly, whispering, "You can rest now." The sound faded, replaced by the faint ring of the distant bell again. For the first time, Lila didn't feel alone. She felt finished. When the fire went out, the air was still. The room looked unchanged except for the thin layer of ashes covering the desk. Lila gathered them gently into the jar, sealing it once more. She set it in the center of the table, exactly where Caleb used to place his coffee cup. She traced a circle around it with her finger, the motion slow and deliberate. Then she stood up and looked around the office. It felt lighter somehow, empty but peaceful. She whispered a quiet thank you into the silence, not knowing who it was meant for. The next morning, the receptionist arrived early and found Lila's office door closed. The faint smell of smoke lingered in the hallway. She hesitated, then knocked gently. No response. When she opened the door, the office was spotless. No papers, no files, not even a pen out of place. Only the jar remained on the desk, sealed and labeled, "Final Session." The receptionist frowned but didn't touch it. She assumed it was part of a therapy exercise. She turned off the candle still flickering in the corner, unaware that a faint heartbeat echoed from inside the glass. Across town, the mentor received an envelope in the mail. Inside was Lila's resignation letter, short and calm. She thanked him for his guidance, said she needed distance to heal. The letter felt formal, almost detached. But at the bottom, a postscript caught his eye. "I finally understand what he meant by boundaries. They're meant to be crossed when the soul demands it." The handwriting changed halfway through the sentence. He stared at it for a long time before quietly folding the paper back into the envelope. He didn't show it to anyone. Some truths were better left sealed. That night, the clinic lights flickered. Security footage later showed the motion sensors activating in Lila's office around midnight, though the building was empty. The jar on the desk vibrated slightly, then settled. Inside, the ashes began to swirl, forming faint patterns against the glass. A shadow flickered briefly on the wall, two figures overlapping, moving as one. Then the lights went out completely. When they came back on, everything was still again. The jar hadn't moved, but the label was gone. In its place was a faint fingerprint pressed against the glass, shaped like a heart. Days turned into weeks. The clinic moved on without her. A new therapist took her office, cheerful and confident. On her first day, she noticed the jar sitting on a high shelf. She asked the staff about it, but no one remembered who left it. They told her it was probably just decoration. She smiled and left it there, unaware that every time she passed by, the faint smell of coffee filled the room. She thought it was comforting. She had no idea that the jar was still listening, still holding the story of a woman who couldn't let go. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, Lila, or whatever remained of her, sat in a small cafe by the sea. She sipped coffee slowly, watching the waves roll in. A man sat across from her, reading a book. She didn't know his name, but when he looked up, she saw Caleb's eyes. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The silence between them felt full, complete. She smiled faintly, not with recognition, but with peace. She didn't know if this was reality or something beyond it. All she knew was that the therapy had finally worked. They were one now. The camera of the mind pulled back from that scene. The cafe, the waves, the two quiet figures frozen in time. The world looked calm again, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But beneath the surface something lingered. A voice, faint but persistent, whispering from deep inside the silence. It said the same phrase over and over, "Session not over." And somewhere, in a forgotten office, the jar on the shelf rattled once softly. The faint sound of a bell echoed again. The story wasn't finished after all. It had simply found a quieter way to continue. Late that night, the sea outside the cafe grew restless. Waves crashed against the rocks as if trying to remind Lila of something she had forgotten. She stirred her coffee slowly, staring at the reflection of her face in the cup. For a moment she saw someone else looking back, a faint outline of Caleb's smile overlapping her own. She blinked, and it was gone. She whispered his name anyway, not out of fear but habit. The world around her felt fragile, like glass under pressure, holding together only because she refused to admit it was already cracked. The man sitting across from her finally looked up from his book. His eyes met hers, calm and steady. They didn't need words. The quiet between them said everything. He closed the book gently, setting it beside his cup. The air between them felt familiar. The kind of silence that exists between two people who share the same secret. She smiled faintly, realizing this was their truce. They weren't enemies anymore. Just two halves of one broken story trying to end together. Outside, thunder rumbled far away like the world was holding its breath for what came next. Rain began to fall softly, tapping against the cafe window. Lila traced a circle in the condensation, the same gesture she had made on her office desk months ago. The sound of the bell above the cafe door chimed faintly, though no one entered. It was the same tone she used to hear in her dreams. She looked up, half expecting to see the ghost of her old self walk through the door, clipboard in hand, ready to take notes. Instead there was nothing, just her reflection in the glass, alone but strangely content with the emptiness surrounding her. She left a few coins on the table and stood to leave. The man with Caleb's eyes nodded once wordlessly before returning to his book. Lila stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, letting it soak her hair and clothes. The cold was grounding, almost cleansing. Each drop felt like a small release, washing away fragments of everything she had carried for too long. Guilt, longing, confusion. As she walked, she realized she no longer heard his voice in her head. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. It finally belonged to her. Back at the clinic, the new therapist stayed late, finishing paperwork. The building was quiet, the clock ticking softly in the hallway. She poured herself coffee and sat back, glancing toward the jar on the shelf. For some reason, she felt drawn to it. She reached up and brought it down carefully. The glass was cold to the touch, and a faint heartbeat echoed when she held it close. She frowned, thinking it was her imagination. Then, faintly, she heard a whisper from inside, a voice so soft it could have been air saying, "You're next." The jar pulsed once. Startled, she nearly dropped it. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. Probably just exhaustion, she thought. She placed the jar back on the shelf and turned off the light. But as she walked away, the faint smell of burnt coffee filled the room again. The jar rattled gently against the wall, just enough to shift its position. A small crack appeared near the lid, releasing a thin wisp of dark smoke. It curled toward the ceiling, forming the faint shape of a woman's face before fading into nothing. The new therapist never saw it. The office fell silent again. A few days later, the mentor returned to collect Lila's remaining belongings. He wanted closure, or at least understanding. The office looked normal, freshly organized. But when he opened the drawer, he found a single page that didn't belong to any file. It was written in neat, familiar handwriting. The note read, "The therapy worked." "He's quiet now." He stared at it for a long time, unsure if he should feel relief or dread. He folded the note carefully, placed it back inside, and left the office. As he closed the door, the faint sound of breathing lingered behind him. Outside, the mentor paused at his car. He looked up at the clinic's window, expecting to see darkness. But for a brief moment, a warm light flickered inside Lila's old office. A shadow moved past the curtain. Slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. He froze, unable to move. Then the light went out completely. The building returned to silence, the rain beginning to fall again. He told himself it was just his imagination. But as he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lila hadn't left, that maybe she never would. The past had a strange way of refusing to die. That night, a janitor working the late shift heard faint music coming from the clinic's second floor. It was soft, almost like humming. When he went up to check, the sound stopped. He shrugged and continued cleaning. But when he passed Lila's old office, he noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked untouched except for a small stack of papers on the desk. The top page read, Session 141, Patient Unknown. The janitor chuckled, assuming it was some kind of leftover form. He closed the door behind him. The moment it clicked shut, the typing resumed by itself. In the following weeks, the new therapist started reporting strange experiences. She'd hear the sound of two voices overlapping during sessions, even when the room was empty. Patients complained of seeing a woman's reflection in the window when she wasn't near it. One day, a child pointed to the empty chair and asked, "Who's that?" The therapist laughed it off, but unease settled deep inside her. She started keeping the door open during sessions. Still, the smell of coffee followed her everywhere, and sometimes when the lights dimmed, she thought she heard faint scribbling behind her. Months passed. The clinic changed names, redecorated, replaced the furniture, but the energy of that room never left. People said it always felt too cold, too quiet. Some joked it was haunted. Others avoided it entirely. The jar stayed sealed on the shelf, covered in dust. Occasionally it would rattle softly, as if reacting to the world outside. No one ever opened it. It became part of the background, a forgotten relic of an old story. But late at night, when the building was empty, the faint ring of a bell still echoed down the hall, calling for another session. Far away, Lila walked along a narrow pier at sunrise. The sky glowed gold, and the waves brushed softly against the wooden posts. She felt lighter, unburdened. Her mind was finally quiet. In her pocket she carried the old bus ticket. Now clean, the ink faded almost to white. She held it between her fingers, smiling faintly. For her it symbolized passage, not escape. Not death, but release. She dropped it into the sea and watched it float for a moment before sinking. The water rippled gently, swallowing it whole. It was over. She was finally letting go. The sun rose higher, casting light across her face. She closed her eyes, feeling warmth instead of fear. She didn't think of Caleb anymore. She didn't need to. He had become part of her story, not her shadow. She whispered a quiet thank you into the breeze, unsure who it was for, him, her father, or the version of herself she left behind. It didn't matter. The waves carried the sound away. Somewhere behind her the faint sound of a chair creaked, though she was alone. She smiled softly, recognizing it as an old habit of memory refusing to die. Back in the city, a young intern started working at the clinic. On her first day she was given the task of organizing old files. In one folder she found recordings labeled with dates that didn't exist. Out of curiosity, she played one. It began with static, then Lila's calm voice, "Tell me how you feel today." A pause, then another voice, male, soft, familiar, answered better. The intern stopped the recording, confused. She checked the next tape. It was the same, but the voices had switched. The final words on the last tape made her drop it. Session complete. The tapes were never logged again. The intern left them on the shelf, too uneasy to ask questions. That night she dreamed of sitting in Lila's old office. Across from her was a woman with dark circles under her eyes, smiling faintly. On the desk sat the same jar, glowing from within. The woman leaned forward and whispered, "You'll understand soon." When the intern woke up, her pillow smelled faintly of coffee and smoke. She didn't go back to work after that. The clinic never found her resignation letter, just an empty chair turned toward the desk. Years later, the clinic closed for good. The building was sold to a small accounting firm, and the new tenants renovated everything: new walls, new paint, new furniture. The jar was thrown away during cleaning, but when the garbage truck passed by the old sea road, it hit a bump, and the jar fell, shattering on the pavement. The ashes scattered into the wind, carried toward the ocean. For a brief second the air smelled like rain and burnt coffee. The driver didn't notice, But if he had looked closer, he might have seen two faint shadows walking side by side. Out on the shore where the wind met the sea, Lila stood with her back to the world. The sky was clear, the water calm. A familiar warmth settled beside her, the same feeling she once feared, now peaceful. She didn't turn to see it. She didn't need to. She knew it was him. Together they watched the horizon, saying nothing. It wasn't love anymore nor madness. It was understanding. Some connections, she realized, don't end. They just change form like waves returning to the ocean they came from. She smiled softly as the tide reached her feet. A distant bell rang across the water, low and rhythmic. Lila closed her eyes and listened. It no longer sounded haunting. It sounded final. She thought about her patience, her failures, her father and the man she created out of grief. All of it led here to this quiet surrender. The wind lifted her hair, carrying away the last traces of her old life. She whispered one final line, the same she used to end every session. You did well today. Her reflection in the wet sand flickered for a moment, then faded as the tide washed it clean. Back in the city, the mentor visited the now empty lot where the clinic once stood. Weeds grew between cracked concrete, and the air smelled faintly of salt from the distant sea. He stood there quietly, holding a single page from Lila's last notebook. It had only 3 words written on it. Session not over. He smiled sadly, folding it into his pocket. Maybe it wasn't meant to be over. Maybe that was the point. Healing wasn't about endings. It was about learning to live with what stayed behind. He turned away, feeling the faintest sense of peace. As he walked away, a breeze passed through the lot, scattering dust into small spirals. The faint sound of footsteps followed him for a few seconds, then stopped. He turned back, but no one was there. Only the wind moved, carrying the faint echo of a woman's voice saying, "Thank you." He nodded slightly, not out of fear, but respect. Whatever had haunted that place wasn't evil. It was unfinished, still searching for balance. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "You're free now." For the first time in years, he truly believed it. The story of Dr. Lila Hart became local legend. People said she'd gone mad after a tragic case, that her spirit still lingered in the old clinic, helping those who were lost. Some swore they saw her near the coast, always walking alone, calm and unbothered. Others said she became part of the sea itself, guiding broken souls who wandered too far. No one knew which version was true. But every now and then, when storms rolled through the city, people could smell coffee and hear a faint bell in the wind. The story never really died. Decades later, a psychology student discovered one of Lila's journals in a library archive. The cover was charred, the pages fragile. Inside, every entry began with session 1 and ended with session complete. There were no dates, no patient names. The student read for hours, captivated by the raw emotion, the confessions that blurred into self-reflection. When she closed it, she felt an ache she couldn't explain. She whispered, "Thank you, Dr. Hart," without meaning to. A faint warmth passed through the room, gentle as a sigh. She smiled, unaware that somewhere far away, a bell rang once. Out at sea, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Lila stood at the water's edge, her silhouette blending with the waves. Beside her, the faint outline of a man shimmered briefly before dissolving into mist. She didn't look back. She simply stepped forward, her feet sinking into the water. The tide embraced her like an old friend. As she walked deeper, her reflection broke apart, scattering into ripples that sparkled under the fading light. Her final thought wasn't fear or regret. It was calm acceptance. The therapy was complete. Night fell quietly. The ocean glowed faintly under the moon, carrying whispers that sounded like overlapping voices. They weren't restless anymore. They were at peace. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, 2 voices became one, speaking in perfect unison. "We're home." The water stilled, the wind softened, and the sound of the bell faded for good. Above, the stars reflected in the sea like unbroken glass. The world didn't mourn them, it remembered them, quietly, like a patient remembering a dream that once helped them heal. Nothing was gone, it had just changed shape. Years later, the sea remained calm where they had vanished. Locals said it was always strangely warm there, even in winter. On quiet nights, if you stood by the pier and listened closely, you could still hear the faint clink of a coffee cup and the whisper of a page turning. Some said it was Dr. Lila continuing her work, helping souls who couldn't let go. Others said it was love refusing to die. But maybe it was simply peace at last, the final session ending not with goodbye, but with silence. And the silence felt kind.